Okay, we're recording. Patrick, you're on.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Patrick Steffen. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Brigham Young University. I'm also the director of clinical training here, so I'm involved with the psychotherapy training of the Ph.D. students. The topic of the presentation is current approaches in cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically looking at the third wave of mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy. And as we get started, I was just wondering, as a point of beginning, what people hope to learn and what people's previous experience with CBT is. Well, I guess that last one might be good, but what are some ideas that you hope to go home with it by the end of this lecture?
Can you repeat the first part of the...
What do you hope to learn today? That would be the simplest way to say it.
Oh, okay. Well, for me, I've studied about CBT. I am a hypnotherapist, so I definitely use, I see CBT as a part of what we do in hypnosis, cognitive restructuring and all of that. I think they're a perfect complement to one another, and I'm hoping to simply learn more.
Sounds good. Any other thoughts, or we can jump into this? Give you 5 seconds. Okay, let's jump in. See if I can get this monitor. Here we go. So the outline for today, what I want to talk about is begin by looking at traditional views of CBT, looking at historical figures such as Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, talk about core principles, basic approach to CBT, and then move into mindfulness, especially awareness and acceptance and how that's integrated into CBT, and then look at acceptance and commitment therapy. There's 6 major facets to what's called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, but I want to focus specifically on diffusion and the use of metaphor, and then look at values leading to committed action. So the take-home message for today is that cognitive behavioral therapy is continually evolving. Some people call cognitive behavioral therapy right now the Wild Wild West because there's so many different views and so many different practices within what's called CBT that it's just because someone says they're CBT doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have any idea how they're actually practice that or what it might look like. So let's get going here. So first, back in the 50s and 60s with Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis starting the idea of, for Beck he called it cognitive therapy. His most famous work, at least in the early days, was the diagnosis and management of depression, and the focus being on cognition. And then Albert Ellis with rational emotive therapy, his book Reason and Emotion in Psychotherapy being a classic work. If you remember the history of psychotherapy, in the 50s and then leading into the 60s, behaviorism was having its heyday. In this view, the mind or the brain is seen as a black box. It's not relevant. All you need is to look at stimulus response contingencies and moderate the environment or manipulate the environment. That's all you have to do. We also had psychoanalytic approaches which looked at the unconscious, which also treated the brain as kind of a black box. At least the person had no direct access to their internal functioning. You needed a psychoanalyst on the couch for 5 years to figure out why you were the way you were. We also had the humanistic tradition beginning with Carl Rogers and more of an emotion-focused approach to things, being aware of one's emotions and the idea of unconditional positive regard. So this was a new trend, the idea that how we think about the world would be the major focus of therapy. Taking a look at some of the key principles behind CBT, both Beck and Ellis quote the Stoic philosophers from early Rome and Greece, and this is a key quote from Epictetus, the idea that people are not disturbed by what happens, but by the thoughts they have about what happens. And both of these, in both of the books we just mentioned, this idea, this quote is mentioned early on and becomes a foundation stone upon which cognitive behavioral therapy is based. that it's not so much what happens in the world that makes us stressed or leads to negative emotions, it's how we interpret or perceive what happens. So the focus of therapy becomes working on those perceptions of life events or things that happen in the world. To give some other 20th century zeitgeist, that there was a lot going on with the idea of cognition, that it wasn't just Freudian or behaviorist focused. William James, about the turn of the century, said, "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another." So the way we think about things, what we choose to focus on, is going to impact our stress. Viktor Frankl, who's a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps during World War II, he founded his version of therapy called logotherapy, logo meaning meaning. So it's focused on the meaning we make in the world. His famous quote, one of his famous quotes said that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So it's our attitude that we have most control over, or we have the most central ability to make a difference in our lives, how we look at our world. And then here we'll do two more quick quotes just to finish this off. Prescott Luckey was in the 1920s, so he was really fighting against the behaviorist movement of the brain not mattering. He had the idea of what he called the self-consistency theory. People strive to maintain a consistent image of self, so it's a very cognitive view. I threw this other guy in here. He's not a psychotherapist, but I always thought his work was very interesting. Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon, and he noted that after doing surgery on a lot of people that there wasn't much of a change, that what they really needed was emotional surgery more than the physical surgery. And he started what he called self-image psychology, that he found that talking to a lot of his patients, people come in the door to have their nose fixed or some really bad scar fixed or something that needed to be changed, that talking to them was sometimes more helpful than doing the surgery. And one of his famous quotes is, "Our self-image, strongly held, essentially determines what we become." So it's how we see ourselves over time, what we truly believe about ourselves, that's what's going to determine how our life goes. Okay. Oh, and one last quote we always have to have, for me anyway, since I love stress and psychophysiology, is Hans Selye. He said, "Adopting the right attitude can convert a negative stress into a positive one." So again, the idea of our attitude is something that we can control, that we can influence our experience through changing how we think about something. And for Selye, being a famous stress researcher, we can impact our stress by changing our attitude about our life events. Okay, so some conclusions from Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, as well as other people who've been quoting that take a very cognitive view. We're not objective observers of the world. Rather, we are active interpreters of the world, with the goal being healthy adaptation. So our brain is not built to observe every last little detail of the world. Rather, our brain and our bodies are built to help us to thrive, to survive and thrive in our given environments or our contexts. So the goal of a well-functioning brain or mind is that we can interpret what's going on and use that information to help us to survive and thrive. So with that idea, that's going to move into the idea of cognitive therapy. When our interpretation of the world starts to break down or become maladaptive, then that's when we begin to have problems. From bringing in a little bit of sensation and perception into this idea of CBT, some famous quotes from sensation and perception researchers. We don't perceive the world as it is, rather we perceive the world as it was useful to see it in the past, meaning that we are historical beings, that our history matters to us, and what's been successful to us in the past, we want to continue doing those things, and what was harmful to us in the past, we want to avoid those things. Additionally, or a correlate of this is we don't perceive the world as it is, rather we perceive the world as we are. So we make sense of the world through using ourselves and our own experience and perception as a lens. Therefore, who we are and what we believe about the world defines how we perceive stress. So our stress is really a function of our own perceptions and how we perceive what's going on. Also, feel free to stop me at any time. I don't have any problem with that. If anything's not clear, any questions you have, any comments, feel free to chime in. Okay, some basic CBT concepts. Because perceptions determine stress, as we've been saying, changing our perceptions is the best way to reduce the amount of stress in our lives. But to be able to do that, first we need to be aware of our perceptions and what contributes to our perceptions. So there's going back again to some of the older Greek philosophers, Socrates saying, know thyself as being a fundamental principle. That's going to definitely be true in CBT. The unexamined life is not worth living. Aaron Beck liked to call his approach to cognitive therapy, one definition of it he has is collaborative empiricism, where the client or the patient, along with the therapist, explore the person's life through home practice and activities to examine what's going on, with the end goal, and this is a wonderful goal I think for all therapy, is that the client or the patient over time becomes their own expert on their own life and becomes their own therapist. So from Beck's point of view, ideally you have your 10 to 20 sessions of CBT, and then you never have to come in again because you've learned those basic skills, and you can apply those basic skills in your daily life as new problems and situations arise. Okay, I also just want to, since as I mentioned, I love stress and psychophysiology, throw in a nod to psychophysiology. CBT, a lot of CBT researchers will incorporate psychophysiological principles. If you look at the limbic system, where a lot of the emotional parts of the brain are, not all emotion is centered in the limbic system, but a lot of it is. 3 key functions of the limbic system are to avoid bad things, to approach good things, and social connection. So avoidance, we see the amygdala, very important in threat detection and fight or flight response. So it keeps us safe, keeps us alive, keeps us engaged in life in a hopefully healthy way. Another part of the amygdala, especially in the basal ganglia areas in the limbic system, approach. So you want to approach good things, such as getting food, resources, getting good things in life. And because we are social beings, we have oxytocin to reinforce social connectedness, and an evolutionary purpose of this is there's strength in numbers, and you're able to accomplish a lot more in groups than alone. If you're interested in more research in this area, Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory is a great place to look at social connectedness and the parasympathetic nervous system. He's got some really cool stuff, as well as his wife, Sue Carter, also does a lot of stuff with oxytocin. There's another guy named Paul Gilbert from the University of Derby in England that looks at, he's more compassion and mindfulness, but he brings in looking at limbic functioning as part of therapy. So core issues in stress and negative mood as far as avoidance and approach go. So first to mention with avoidance and approach, acute activation is good. You want to avoid bad things and approach good things. But if you're always chronically stressed out, chronically having your amygdala activated, that's not good for your health. You can have a chronically elevated stress response if that's true. And if you're chronically trying to approach good things, that could get out of whack as well. So in CBT with avoidance, what you'll see is avoiding thinking about things that are uncomfortable. So you don't want to feel about a problem or situation. The huge negative to this is if this is your chronic way of dealing with the world, then you never learn how to solve recurring problems in your life, and problems that keep coming back, instead of resolving them, they keep hitting you over and over again because you're unwilling to deal with them. Maladaptive coping, so issues with approach. You're using bad strategies to cope with a problem situation. For example, if you're looking at drugs, a lot of those like cocaine hit the basal ganglia areas of the limbic system, the nucleus accumbens to ventral tegmental area, the dopaminergic rich parts of the brain. Those are highly impacted by drugs. They're also impacted by fat and sugar. So some people do emotional eating to cope with stress. Gambling also hits this part of the limbic system. So really these are maladaptive attempts at coping that miss the mark. So the person's trying to effectively engage in life. Well, ideally we want to be effectively engaged in life, but these attempts at coping or approaching good things in life are turning out poorly for the person. So they become targets for therapy. Okay, some core principles in CBT. Self-talk is at the core of this. How do we talk to ourselves? So our perceptions of the world are largely determined by our self-talk. It's been estimated that our internal dialogue is about 500 to 1,000 words per minute. You might ask, how could it be that fast? The reason is the brain can go through a lot of ideas very quickly if you don't have to use your vocal cords to say it out loud. Your brain can zip through tons of different ideas. So the question is usually what CBT begins with is, what are you saying to yourself? So what is your self-talk? What's going on? You might imagine the biggest negative issue or the biggest problem from a CBT perspective is negative evaluation or negative thoughts about the world. So if we're constantly evaluating and judging what is happening in our lives with negative evaluations, we're going to dramatically increase our stress. A lot of what happens in life tends to be neutral or ambiguous. It's not clearly negative or positive. It's just a lot of what happens in life just is. But if we have a negative tendency to view the neutral as negative, to interpret neutral as negative, then a lot of our life is going to become negative. So people that come in with, especially with depression and anxiety, those are the two biggest diagnoses that will walk in the door for psychotherapy. A lot of these people with depression, you have this kind of overwhelming sense that the world is too stressful, that things are too hard, and this kind of negative past view. With anxiety, you have this sense of worrying about the future, that something bad is going to happen. In both cases, with depression, you have more of this negative view of the past. With anxiety, this negative view of the future. But in both cases, you have this negative lens through which everything's seen. So the core narrative is a big piece of trying to identify how do people tell stories about their lives, or how do they make sense of events in their lives. So the core question becomes, what are the elements of your core narrative? And two key pieces to this. The most direct one is the idea of automatic thoughts. That when something happens, we automatically have a thought about it, we judge it, evaluate it, and it's automatic in the sense we're not even usually consciously aware that we're doing this. We just have the habit of evaluating on a regular basis what's going on. So a key piece of CBT is what's called a thought record, where you have people track their thoughts during the week. Specifically, if something happens or they're starting to feel more depressed or more anxious than usual, that when they feel that, to take out their thought record and write down what's going on. And so they can start evaluating, something happened, I thought something, and then I assumed something, or led to a certain emotion, and then led to this this negative sense of being. Schemas are like, what's a good way of putting this? They are heuristics, ways of seeing the world, ways of interpreting the world that are more foundational than automatic thoughts. They're like key ideas of who you are as a person that most likely developed in childhood for either good or for bad. And they become a framework for which you make sense of the world. So if you grew up in a traumatic family life, there's a lot of abuse, maybe you grew up with an idea that you were defective, and although you're no longer in that family life and you're in a very healthy place now, you could still have the schema that at some core level that you are defective and unworthy at some level. And so some CBT therapists conduct what they call schema therapy, which focuses on these deeper beliefs, underlying beliefs, which are very painful to deal with, but as the saying goes, the only way out is through, meaning that the best way to deal with problems is to go through them and not to avoid them. As the last point, it says here with the automatic, going back to the automatic thoughts, that most of our self-talk is unconscious or habitual, that we're automatically thinking things all day long, and part of CBT is helping people to realize that this is occurring. It's a revelation for a lot of people I see in therapy, that they don't realize how much they are evaluating things on a regular basis. They don't realize how much they're making negative judgments about things that are happening. It just happens so quickly, they just assume, well, that's just the way it is, when it's really not an objective view of the world, it's an interpretation and a judgment that they personally made. So one of the first steps of CBT is helping people to realize how much this happens, and then to become aware of it, and then to track it, and then to change it. Okay, this is from David Burns' The Feeling Good Handbook. I think it's like 1984. These are his top 10 negative cognitive distortions that people engage in. We'll just look at a couple of them. For example, all or nothing thinking. So in this view, you should look at things as an absolute black or white category. So if you fail, for example, for students, if you fail one test, that means you're a failure in general. So everything is either wonderful or horrible, either works great or it's horrible. Overgeneralization, you view events as a never-ending pattern of defeat. So you failed this one test, that means, well, I'm going to fail all the other ones as well. You don't look at it as a specific instance, you look at it as a general way of how you are doing. Mental filter, you dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives. So you're very quick to notice when something bad happens, but if something good happens, you cast it aside and say, well, that was just this one time, or that wasn't such a big deal. So then here's some more. There's lots of different ways that we can negatively judge the world. And part of CBT is identifying these and helping people to have more realistic or more positive attributions. So one approach to therapy, that this is going back to the idea of the thought record, how you'd use the thought record, is you have an activating event, irrational beliefs, and emotional consequences. We have the A, B, C. So what usually happens is something happens and then people feel sad or depressed. And so the goal of the ABC model is to help people to slow down and stop and realize between the event and the emotion, there usually is some belief. So, for example, say you got a low score on a test that you were hoping that you were going to do better on. You see the score, now you feel depressed. If you slow the process down, you'll realize in between there are beliefs, negative beliefs that occurred between the event and the emotion, such as, oh, this means I'm going to fail out of the program, or I'm not going to be able to do well in this class, or what this means about me as a person and my abilities. Again, the brain is so fast with these, and people are so used to this happening in the background that they don't realize it until using the ABC model. You slow things down, realize something happened, and you slow down to what was going through my mind at the time of that event. And then it becomes clear why the depressed emotional consequences came. And then using the thought record, the end result, the end goal of using the thought record is to start substituting in realistic thoughts and then seeing how that impacts mood. I have a video, just kind of funny. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear this. Let's give it a shot, and then if you can't hear it, we'll just stop. But let me see if I can get into let's see which one is this. So let me put this up. Can you guys see this? Well, let me try it.
Yes, I can see it.
Do you have a hard time believing? Okay, but before I let it go, can you guys hear what the guy was saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, here we go.
Gravity. Do you have a hard time believing the Earth is round? Do you have a hard time believing a high-fiber cereal can taste great? Then you might be suffering from IDS. Gravity? One word. No way. Hi, I'm Dr. Taggart Bain, CEO of the Coping with Disbelief Clinic. Did you know that as of right now, over 3 billion Americans could be suffering from IDS? Irrational disbelief syndrome. IDS is a condition in which people are incapable of believing in things which are universally understood to be true.
I don't believe in penguins. I don't believe in platypus, bears, horses.
I don't believe fiber one is high in fiber. Tastes too good.
No matter how irrational, absurd, or obvious, some people simply refuse to believe what we consider to be the indisputable. But now there is help. Thanks to a proven therapeutic cure we can all believe in.
Do you believe that I believe that you don't believe you have a problem with disbelief?
Wait, what?
I've spent the last 20 years studying IDS, helping hundreds of people overcome their problems with disbelief. You're not crazy if you don't believe in science, trees, or gravity. You have IDS, and I can help.
I can't believe.
you can believe.
Don't worry, we'll make a believer out of you.
Okay, so I can get out of this thing now. There we go. Okay, sorry there's a little bit off tangent there, but it always makes me laugh and always makes me think of cognitive behavioral therapy when I see that. With the basic idea of addressing people's belief systems. Someone had a comment?
I just was laughing.
Oh, okay.
It's good.
So the basic idea with that was a Fiber One commercial. Of all things, that's a fiber cereal commercial. But that if you address your beliefs, you can move forward in your life. Okay, I just want to take a moment here and explain it to your neighbor, explain it to yourself, the question of what are the core traditional principles and approaches of CBT. So what do you think? What are the core ideas behind CBT? Anything jump out to anybody?
Well, it's that our automatic thoughts and the way we process what is happening to us objectively affects our emotions and behaviors. I'm thinking.
Exactly. Yes. So the way we perceive what's going on around us and the way we automatically think about those things is going to impact our mood and our behavior, what we're going to do. So the goal of CBT is to make what's automatic or unconscious, to make it something that you're aware of and that you can adjust or change your thoughts to be more realistic and more positive and move you in a more positive direction. Any questions before we move in? We're going to talk about mindfulness now, and then we'll talk about ACT. So we're going to start moving. Yes, please.
I'm a trauma therapist,
Yes.
and I find very often that, and I'm pretty slow-paced as a habit. So usually when people are with me, they slow down. But people who have been traumatized don't always have voluntary access to their underlying belief systems, especially if that stuff started pre-linguistically. Then their beliefs may be more physically based or mapped into the brain than they are a cognitive statement. And so could you just address that?
Going to the idea of avoidance, some things can be so painful that the avoidance strategies have just kind of pushed it down, like you'd say, into your body, that they have no cognitive access to that, but they can definitely, you see the muscle tension, the GI upset, the sleep difficulties, I guess you could say maybe probably immune function problems as well, that you see the physical manifestations, but the person with the trauma really has no cognitive access to it. So that's why you have, I don't know if people have read the book The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. If anyone's heard of that one. A lot of what he talks about involves body work, try and work through difficult traumas that the things can be so traumatic that the brain just cannot deal with it, that it just stays in consciousness. And it takes a lot of time to work through that.
So I guess I want to just ask again. So if the experiences were pre-linguistic, the kid was younger than 3 years old when bad stuff happened, and even sometimes at ages 3 and 4, there hasn't been a full cognitive thought about this thing. So you know, when I teach people, the first thing that I teach them is that little people have an unexpressed belief system that if I feel bad, I'm bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty simple thing, and very few of my clients can get to the point where at any sort of linguistic level they can find those words. I mean, they might say to me, well, I survived, and that's kind of as close as they can get. So how can you help somebody with CBT to get through that, to resolve?
Yeah, from a CBT perspective, one of the first goals I would think would be to increase their ability to engage positively in the world, to have positive experiences, especially to have a sense of control in life, to feel that they can do things to cope with life. So maybe like skills-based learning, or learning how to deal with other people, or learning how to deal with their emotions. So even if you can't, because this is pre-linguistic, you can't put it into, they weren't able to put into words what was happening to them, that through learning now that they do have the ability to have control over things or to be skilled at things, that can help them deal with the trauma because they have a better sense of self. So even though you can't get back to that era of life, so to speak, linguistically, you can teach them, or through their own experiential learning, that they can be successful in life, that they can have self-efficacy. So it's having a series of positive experiences where they are successful. It's can maybe think of a skills-building approach from a CBT perspective. From a bodywork perspective, which is not really CBT at all, would be the idea of you're working through it at a physical level, whether you're doing, what are some of the bodywork approaches I'm trying to think of, Feldenkrais or...
DBT.
What's that?
DBT.
DBT, which could also bring in, what do you call it, eye movement desensitization.
EMDR.
Yeah, the MDR. That you're bringing in this more of a physical component to it, and that you're working it out physically, that even though they were pre-linguistic, they still had their, a body, a central nervous system that was registering these events. And again, from the CBT perspective, they would focus on positive skill building as like a foundational place to begin, and helping to build a sense of self-efficacy and a sense of I can be powerful, I can control, I can do things of value in my life. But when it comes to PTSD or trauma work, I would encourage a broader perspective than just CBT.
Thank you.
CBT could be like a framework, but you'd bring in other aspects within that.
Would you do the other aspects in tandem or after or first?
I think it would be in tandem. I'd make it more of an integrative approach, and I'd try and tailor it to the person you're working with, because you might have this grand idea of what you want to do, and you find out that the person's not ready for it, and you might need to temper what you're doing to go on pace with what they're capable of handling in the moment.
And do you have any experience using neurofeedback or biofeedback to access those things?
I'm certified in biofeedback, and with anxiety, we definitely use biofeedback as a way of, I think biofeedback gets you there quicker with someone with anxiety because you can see their heart rate and respiration in real time. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things with a lot of, especially people that are professionals with anxiety, they're able to intellectualize things very quickly, and they'll say, oh, I'm not that bad off, whatever, and you can say, well, you're used to being this way, but you look at your heart rate, it's at 100 right now, your respiration's over 20, that you are physiologically very aroused, and then that it can be like a nice moment of breakthrough. They go, wow, I didn't realize how tense I was. Or also you can bring in the muscle tension, like say in the trapezius and the neck. They don't realize how much tension they carry with them. They don't realize how fast they're breathing, how fast their heart rate goes, especially when they're bringing up something that's difficult for them, and they don't want to admit to themselves. Usually I think they're fine admitting it to the therapist, but a lot of times they don't want to admit to themselves that something's an issue. And the biofeedback can show them in real time. It's like, you were very calm, you brought up this issue with a coworker, and now your heart rate is skyrocketed, your respiration's up, your muscles are tense. And I think it gets you there quicker with them to help them realize what's happening at the whole body level when they are experiencing their anxiety.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, let's move into mindfulness here. As we move into mindfulness, I want to start with the fight or flight response, because this is going to take us to Tibet in 1 second. So fight or flight response, we perceive the situation as stressful or threatening. Again, this idea of perception. Not everyone perceives things the same way. Stress hormones are released. I put stress in quotes because there's really no hormone in the body that's purely a stress hormone. Even cortisol, which we call a stress hormone, the metabolic hormone, which is helpful during the times of stress. So even when you're most relaxed, adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, you're going to find these coursing through your blood because they serve regular purposes even when you're completely relaxed. Blood pressure increases, immune function suppressed, body gears up for immediate action. So this is just a prelude into trying to find a relaxation response to the stress response. So we have Tibetan monks entering the scene. Late 60s, early 70s, meditation was extremely popular. Medical researchers such as Herbert Benson, if you've heard of him, he had the book called The Relaxation Response, I think in the early 80s, hypothesized that if we could learn meditation, we could counteract the fight or flight response. They went to Tibet, or I guess northern India, because of their remarkable abilities in meditation. So what could we learn from Tibetan monks that could help us deal with stress? Here's the picture of, do you guys recognize these people? Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr.
Mm.
So they went to meet with Maharishi in 1968. So this idea of going to India, also if you're familiar with Steve Jobs, also I think he went in 1972 to go meditate and to have that experience. So Herbert Benson, as I mentioned, with the relaxation response, found that through meditation, monks can change their perception of the world and thereby their response to stress. And it's not just their mind they're changing, they're able to change their physiology in very radical ways. Again, the key is how we perceive events, and the relaxation response that Benson coined is really the opposite of the fight or flight response. How do we purposely induce a relaxation response? I want to show you, this is a more serious clip. This is from the History Channel, I think, but it shows some of the research that he was doing. So let me bring this one up so I can get this to full screen. Here we go.
For years, Dr. Herbert Benson of the Harvard Medical School has been conducting experiments on Buddhist monks from Tibetan monasteries to assess the effects of meditation on the body's metabolism. His research has provided a remarkable insight into the ways the mind can alter the functioning of the body.
What we found with respect to their oxygen consumption, in simple meditation, they decrease their metabolism upwards of 64%. And this was the largest decrease in oxygen consumption that was ever recorded in experiments by a simple restful procedure.
Carefully monitoring a form of Dzogchen meditation known as Tum Mo, the yoga of inner heat, Benson came up with even more intriguing results.
What we found initially in Tumo was that monks were able to increase their skin temperature in environments of 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
But that was just the beginning.
Well, what we found in these monks, in very cold environments of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, wrapping themselves in wet sheets, these monks astoundingly could increase their temperature enough to get the sheets steaming and dry the sheets. You and I would go into uncontrollable shivering and perhaps even die of too low blood pressure. They were quite comfortable there simply by performing meditational heat yoga.
When asked how they do it, the monks describe relaxing, focusing on their breathing. They picture air coming in and out as a kind of energy. They visualize it as a flame, a fire coursing through the chest. Dr. Benson has shown that anyone who performs the initial steps of meditation can have a significant effect on their body. Meditation can help the treatment of stress-related health problems, such as anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and cardiac irregularities.
Okay, so let's get back into this one. So this was the beginning of, or I guess maybe one of the beginnings through science of bringing in meditation and mindfulness into Western practices. And eventually it made its way into cognitive behavioral therapy as well. So some of the reasons why, this is Dalai Lama 14, this is the current Dalai Lama. So why would we want meditation or mindfulness practices in CBT? Dalai Lama said, all suffering in this life and others is created by the unsubdued mind. Through meditation, we can transform the way in which we act, speak, and think. So this fits very well within a CBT framework, the idea it's through our mind, what he calls the unsubdued mind, that leads to suffering. So our negative approach to seeing the world causes us to suffer. Here's another quote that I really like. It says, meditation is a technique used to calm and develop the mind. There are many different meditation methods to suit all kinds of practitioners, but all methods are designed to break through psychological conditioning and lead the practitioner from ordinary perception to extraordinary perception. So through meditation or through mindfulness, we can change the way we perceive our world. Okay, so what exactly is mindfulness? Let's give a basic definition. And these are Grossman and Hayes are both psychologists. So these are psychologists interpreting mindfulness within a psychological framework. So Grossman says kind, open, non-judging, and sustained moment-to-moment awareness of perceptible mental states and processes. Hayes, Stephen Hayes, is the one that created acceptance commitment therapy. And when we get into acceptance commitment therapy, you'll see that mindfulness plays a central role within the ACT framework as well. Diffused, non-attached, accepting, non-judgmental, deliberate awareness of experiential events as they happen in the moment. When we get to ACT, we'll note that for Hayes, a lot of distress and mental illness comes from experiential avoidance, not being willing to experience or avoiding our current experiences, not willing to be with where we are currently. Okay, some assumptions of Buddhist psychology. We are often aware, we're often unaware of our moment-to-moment experience, as we talk about with CBT, with automatic thoughts. This maps on perfectly. This is the soil for misinterpretation, also maps very well with CBT. So if we think of negative evaluations, social phobics, etc. Rumination, for example, is not present-focused. Rumination is a key part of CBT theory of depression, that we ruminate about negative things over and over again. Another key aspect of Buddhist psychology is that anyone can develop awareness. This isn't just something for Tibetan monks in a monastery somewhere. Anybody can develop this ability. However, at the same time, development is gradual. We need to be practicing on a regular basis, even if it's just 20 minutes a day. You can't learn about mindfulness all in one day. You can't develop any type of skill all in one day. Observation and awareness will increase our accuracy of observation and present focus, especially observation of our own thoughts and how we have the tendency to be negative in certain situations, and learn to moderate that. Okay, other views from cognitive Buddhist psychology. Everything you perceive outside of yourself is a reflection of your own thinking. That fits both within mindfulness and CBT. You see who you are by seeing who you think other people are. So when you are evaluating the world, you're really just projecting yourself out into the world. So if you see negative things about people, well, those are issues that are obviously important to you because you're projecting on the world, but doesn't necessarily teach you anything about the person that you're judging, because those are your labels, those are your thoughts, those are your judgments, and they say more about you because you're bringing those up than they do about the other person. So at the core of this, you are the storyteller, the projector of all stories, and the world is a projected image of your thoughts. So a key piece of mindfulness within CBT is realize that we are storytellers and that we are the ones, how would I say this? We are the ones making the story. You know, I just realized I think we missed a slide here. Oh no, I'm sorry. We didn't miss a slide. It's coming up. Okay. So now this is the slide. This is where I wanted to be. Okay, so this idea of the core narrative we mentioned in CBT, it's about this core narrative within CBT, within therapy. We want to help people consciously change their story to a more healthier, more positive story. Also, if you look in the field of neuroscience, we don't have time to talk about this right now, but there's a lot of neuroscience research that shows that our narrative is our health. The narrative that if we have a positive narrative, we'll have positive health. If we have a negative narrative, we're going to have negative health. And that's both at the brain level as well as throughout the body. Really cool article by Creswell in Psychosomatic Medicine. I highly recommend you read this if you're interested in mindfulness. It's called, from 2007, it's called The Neural Correlates of Dispositional Mindfulness During Affect Labeling. And what they found was, this was an MRI study, that labeling emotions would increase prefrontal activity and decrease amygdala activity. So as we mentioned before, the amygdala is highly involved in threat detection and negative mood. The prefrontal cortex of the brain is where our narrative occurs. It's where we narrate our life stories. For people that received lobotomies back a long time ago, that was part of the brain that was lobotomized, was removed, and it took away people's ability to narrate their own lives, to make sense of their own lives. The cool part of this study they found is that the more you're able to narrate your life, to have a clear explanation is if you can explanation for why what's happening is happening, your amygdala activity will go down. And this is even if the situation doesn't disappear. So say you have a continuing stressor of a coworker or of difficulties at school or whatever this might be. Even if that situation doesn't disappear, if you're able to make sense of it and be able to tell a story about how you live within that situation that's meaningful to you, your amygdala activity will go down. So this is really cool research, and there's a line of research with Creswell and other people pursuing this. This is one quote from this article. They're quoting this person. It says, the skillful use of labeling during mindful contemplation can help strengthen clear recognition and understanding. At the same time, labeling introduces a healthy degree of inner detachment, since the act of apostrophizing one's moods and emotions diminishes one's identification with them. And this is a key idea in CBT, and this is actually going to be a core idea within acceptance and commitment therapy. This idea of realizing that we're not our thoughts, and we're not our moods and our emotions, and we can take a step back and detach from those, be aware of those, and not be totally kind of sucked in or immersed into those and feeling like we're kind of stuck in this negative soup of life. Okay, this is just a book if you're interested. Loving What Is by Byron Katie. She kind of created her own, I guess, psychotherapeutic view of the world, but if you read it, she also cites Epictetus, the quote of, it's not what happens that matters, it's what we think about what happens, and then she also brings a lot of mindfulness stuff. So she does a nice kind of popular press book on how to integrate cognitive and mindful approaches. And I think it's a very...
It's a great book.
You've read that book?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I recommend this to anyone interested in a mindfulness approach to CBT.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take a moment. Explain it to your neighbor, explain it to me. What do awareness and acceptance have to do with CBT? Why do they fit within a CBT framework? What are some thoughts people have?
I can answer.
Please do.
Okay. I feel like I'm the only one talking, so I don't want to...
That's okay.
Well, awareness is what it's all about. It's what's lacking and what will allow a person to go to the next step. Awareness is like taking a flashlight and shining it inside and going, that's what I've been doing to myself.
Yeah.
Acceptance is about seeing reality, seeing and accepting the reality, the present moment, as for what it is, without the automatic judgment. that we have on things. If let's say we're trying to meditate and a car is honking, acceptance to me is in your mind saying a car is honking, period, without the automatic next step, therefore I can't meditate or I can't get into focus or, you know, this is going to be a bad day or it just is.
Start having those negative evaluations that take you out of your awareness.
Yes.
Being in the moment. Anyone, was the first cartoon Kung Fu Panda? People seen that? I just think of the little Kung Fu master, the one that's pose master that's trying to focus on inner peace, and there's like I don't know if it's a little mosquito or bug keeps bugging him, kind of like the car honking, that he's having a hard time being centered and in the moment because of distractions.
I think there's another piece to this, isn't there, about acceptance? Because the alternative to acceptance is non-acceptance, which means we're either running from it, fighting it, or somehow activating our system back to all those automatic things.
Yes, avoidance problems.
Patrick, this is Rick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just letting you know that a lot of people are going to have to leave at 1.
Okay, well I will go through this next part quickly. Let's jump ahead here. So acceptance commitment therapy, key contributions to CBT is the focus on experiential avoidance more clearly and the idea of diffusing from negative thoughts. I like the use of metaphors, and then the focus on personal values and committed action. So jumping to experiential avoidance, cause of most suffering is avoiding, not accepting our experience. CBT, not always clear on this. As I mentioned, the CBT can be the wild, wild west as far as there's so many different views out there. But I really believe that experiential avoidance is a key problem that we have, that people don't want to be in touch with who they are at the moment. ACT, to deal with this, acceptance commitment therapy integrates mindfulness principles as an important method for accepting experience and not avoiding. So this is a key first step, is to be with your experience. Diffusion, we are not our thoughts. The CBT is not always clear on this either, that we need to diffuse from our thoughts and think we are more than just our thoughts, that we have the ability, we can step back and observe our thoughts. So diffusion involves distancing, disconnecting, or seeing thoughts and feelings for what they are, streams of words, passing sensations, and not what they say they are as dangers or facts. So in CBT, some people say, oh, you have to have, we want to always focus on having positive thoughts. The cool thing about ACT is it's not bad. You can have negative thoughts and that's fine, but realize that those negative thoughts are not you, that you defuse from these thoughts. And those are just something that comes along. So you have this more of this acceptance of, if I have a negative thought, that's okay. And you just let it come and let it go. Okay, some diffusion techniques. Stop, step back, observe the thoughts, feelings, what's happening to you for the other person. Notice what's happening, your thoughts, physical sensations, emotions, images, memories. Notice the way you're interpreting what they mean, how it's affecting you. Notice the unhelpful thoughts. It can help to say them differently in a non-threatening way, slowly, in a squeaky, comic voice, write them down. If you've seen ACT done by ACT therapists, this can be kind of a funny part of it, that whatever the fear, thought, or idea is, you have them say it in a number of different ways until you repeat it so much that it almost just becomes meaningless, that they realize that it's just a thought, it's just a word. So identify the emotion you're feeling and label the unhelpful thought. So this is like the mindfulness as well we mentioned with labeling, that gives the prefrontal power over the amygdala. Metaphors. So metaphors, I think, is a nice thing to incorporate into therapy. Metaphors help us see thoughts in a different light. Just that alone, just this idea of seeing thoughts differently, helps us create a space, a distance between us and our thoughts, which helps us to stand back a little, see things more objectively. There's this website from the UK, from the United Kingdom, Get Self-Help. I think it's some cool stuff on there. This piece is taken from there. Two really cool, frequently used metaphors: the tug of war. We're imagining you're having a tug of war over this deep chasm with this monster that wants to pull you into the chasm, and you're struggling with this rope, trying to fight against this monster. What's a potential solution to this problem? What can you do?
Let go of the rope.
Exactly. So from the ACT, it's like you can let go of the rope. You don't have to keep fighting with these negative thoughts, these monsters you have. you can let go of the rope. The monster's still there on the other side of the chasm, but you don't have to be fighting with it all the time. So that's one of the main metaphors they start with. Another is the passengers on the bus metaphor, where you're the bus driver and you have this bus full of people, bus full of different voices. There could be a negative voice, the scared voice, the angry voice, all these different voices, but you don't have to listen to them. They can be saying what they're saying and you can be okay with that. So you just realize that you can have negative thoughts come to your mind and that's okay. Okay, values, this is what I think is the core piece for me. I think it's the most interesting part that's really not in CBT at all, is living your life according to your own personal values. So what we value is going to impact our personality, our choices, our adaptations, how we tell our life story. Problem is, most people cannot explicitly state what their values are. So what they have you do, this is from Stephen Hayes, one thing you can do to identify your values is to imagine your own funeral. First, to get it into your mind is, who do you see at your funeral? What would it be like to be there? What are the people saying about you? What was said in the eulogy? And then you see what they say, and then you think, what are the most ideal things people could say about you? And then based on this ideal eulogy of your life, if you could project yourself to being a spirit at your funeral, what would you want people to say about you? What do you value most? So Stephen Hayes in ACT says, to live your fullest, best life, organize your life around your values on a daily basis. So your goal isn't to avoid negative things. Your goal is to live a valued life, to focus your actions and your energy and your thoughts on what's most important to you. So some thoughts to consider as you think about this. Is the life I'm living worth what I'm giving up to have it? I think it's a really important question. I'm going to read it again. It says, is the life I am living, what you're doing right now, is the life I'm living right now worth what I'm giving up to have it? So the things that you're doing right now, is that worth giving up your life to be doing those things? Another way of saying this is, if what you're doing for a living, let me see, I need to edit this. If what you're doing for a living, get rid of that you. If what you're doing for a living does not inspire you and does not allow you to flourish, then why are you doing it? That's another important question, is if you're not inspired, you're not flourishing with what you're doing, why are you doing it? And then the last question, what do I really want from my life? To be thinking about it. Main goal of ACT, as I mentioned, main goal of ACT is not to avoid negative emotions. And it seems like a lot of CBT people do seem like their main goal in life is just to get rid of negative emotions. Not the main goal in ACT. It is okay to experience negative emotions in ACT. Main goal of ACT is to live a valued life, to be aware of where you are, and then commit to move in a valued direction. That's the main goal of ACT. And so a lot of therapists I know, we're incorporating this into our practice because I think a lot of people resonate with this, and I think it creates a nice foundation. If you're interested in learning more, Stephen Hayes is the author or the inventor of ACT. This is a book. It's not the easiest to read. This is a self-help book for the average person, but it's really not that easy to read. This one's much easier to read, ACT Made Simple. So this was written for the average person. This is written for the therapist, but this one's easier to read, even though this is written for a therapist and this is written for the average person. So this is really the one I recommend. Okay, so writing to learn at the very end here, I recommend as just to take home key ideas for you. What are 3 key ideas that I've learned today? Just write some ideas down for what's most helpful to you. And then if you have any questions, you can email me at steffen@byu.edu. Okay, any final questions? This was my last slide right here. I got it done by 2:03, or at least 2:03 Mountain Time, 1:03 Pacific Time. Okay, any last questions before we wrap up?
You did good.
Thanks, Patrick. I really enjoyed listening to that.
Thank you.
This is Cynthia. I appreciate it.
Good to hear from you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that's it. I'm going to stop the recording.